This video is part of a series. To better understand it, I recommend you watch the previous 3 videos. If the Long Night actually happened when the Andals came, why does virtually no one in the story know this? Well, first, think about this. If the Andals triggered the others and the Long Night, do you think the Andals would want everyone to know? Actually, here's an even better question. Did the Andals possess the capacity to prevent everyone from knowing? Did they have the power to rewrite history? Well, evidently they did. We're told that what little is known to us of the Dawn Age is contained in the oldest of texts, in the tales written down by the Andals and other early civilizations. Yet, however ancient those lettered races, they were not even children during the Dawn Age, so what truths their tales contain are difficult to find. So, most of what we know of the Dawn Age comes from the Andals, particularly everything we know of the Dawn Age in Westeros. And this also applies to the Age of Heroes, because what we truly know of those ancient days is hardly more than what we know of the Dawn Age. The tales we have now are the work of septons and maesters, writing thousands of years after the fact. However, the same also goes for the Long Night. Remember what Samwell said in A Feast for Crows. The oldest histories we have were written after the Andals came to Westeros. The first men only left us runes on rocks, so everything we think we know about the Age of Heroes and the Dawn Age and the Long Night comes from accounts set down by septons thousands of years later. Everything we know about the past comes from the septons, from the Andals. The first men only left us runes on rocks, so history was for the Andals to rewrite however they pleased. All this being said, is there any evidence history could have actually been deliberately revised by the Andals? Well, there might be. Throughout A Song of Ice and Fire, there's this book mentioned every now and again. This book is named True History. I believe it was written by the Andals to serve their best interests. At first glance, the title of this book should draw suspicion. Someone evidently declared all other accounts of history to be false, and only wants their own account of history to be considered truth. Whether or not they should be trusted, we shall soon see. Oddly enough, we're never given the name or names of those who authored True History, and the book is only ever mentioned in its own capacity. For example, when characters invoke True History, they simply say, "True history says this, true history says that." No author is ever specified. The likeliest explanation is that there were several authors involved in writing true history. This would then open up the possibility that this book was a conspiracy, because that would mean a group of like-minded individuals gathered together decided on what parts of history should be considered true and what shouldn't, wrote this book, and then presented it as the one true history that all should follow. Otherwise, why would they have the audacity to name it True History? With all this in mind, here's something that might surprise you. The current timeline everyone accepts for the Long Night comes from True History. When characters say that the Long Night happened 8,000 years ago, that comes from True History. Not only that, but since the Starks were established as a house in the aftermath of the Long Night, everyone believes their house is 8,000 years old, just like the Wall and the Night's Watch. So, it seems everyone in the story believes True History. If true history was a conspiracy and a cover-up, then that means it worked, since most people believe the Long Night was 8,000 years ago. However, remember what Sam said about the Long Night. Everything we know about the Long Night, everything we believe, comes from Septons, from the Andals. And one thing everyone believes is that the Long Night was 8,000 years ago. So it seems very likely that Septons were involved in the writing of true history. This might be why we're never given the names and affiliations of those who authored true history. If we found out the authors were mostly Septons, well, then it would obviously reek of an Andal conspiracy. Furthermore, since most people believe true history, this would then explain why most people have no clue that the Long Night may have occurred in the Andal invasion, because true history was a success. However, all throughout the books, we're presented with many discrepancies regarding this currently accepted timeline of true history, such as the others hating iron before there was iron, and the last hero wielding dragonsteel in the Long Night, and many other accounts and tales of the Age of Heroes that just don't coincide with the details. Even then, regardless of these discrepancies, this timeline of true history already comes into dispute in the World of Ice and Fire. Maester Yandel affirms it has only been 6,000 years since the Long Night. And George R.R. Martin himself has said that other maesters insist it has only been half that long. So, whether or not you believe the Long Night occurred in the Andal invasion, you have to admit that something is not right with this currently accepted timeline. You have to admit that something is not right with true history, since true history is what gave us this currently accepted timeline. True history gave us 8,000 years ago for the Long Night. So, on top of George giving us many clues throughout the books that something's not right with this timeline, that something's not right with true history, he further reinforced this doubt with Maester Yandel saying it has only been 6,000 years, and he went even further by telling us that they are maesters who insist it has only been half that long ago. It's almost like he's trying to tell us that true history is actually very wrong and untrue. Which begs the very important question. Why would George want to include true history in his novels in the first place? It's a blatantly false and untrue book. It must serve a narrative purpose then, but what is it? Well, like I said in the beginning of this video, if the Andals triggered the others and the Long Night, they would want to hide this fact. They would want to cover it up. I believe George wants us to realize there was a cover-up, and he's giving us the clues through the false book of true history. But enough speculation. There is something that true history proposes that blatantly exposes itself as an Andal scheme. It involves the history of High Heart. When the Andals invaded Westeros and arrived in the Riverlands, they came face to face with High Heart. High Heart was a hill that had been sacred to the children of the forest. It was a hill so lofty that, from atop it, Arya felt as though she could see half the world. The hill was so high and the surrounding lands so flat that no enemy could approach unseen. Around its brow stood a ring of huge pale stumps, all that remained of a circle of once mighty weirwoods. There were 31 weirwoods. These weirwoods had been cut down and the children slaughtered when the Andal king Erig the Kinslayer had cut down their grove. So, the Andals were seemingly responsible for the destruction of High Heart. However, the World of Ice and Fire goes into more detail on this and tells us that High Heart was under the protection of the kings of the First Men, and when Erig's warriors sought to cut down the trees, these First Men fought beside the children, but the might of the Andals was too great. Though the children and the First Men made a valiant effort to defend their holy grove, all were slain. This isn't the only passage about High Heart in the World of Ice and Fire. This next one goes into even more detail, and Maester Yandel then mentions true history. The great hill called High Heart was especially holy to the First Men, as it had been to the children of the forest before them. Crowned by a grove of giant weirwoods, ancient as any that had been seen in the Seven Kingdoms, High Heart was still the abode of the children and their greenseers. When the Andal king, Erig the Kinslayer, surrounded the hill, the children emerged to defend it, calling down clouds of ravens and armies of wolves, or so the legend tells us. Yet, neither tooth nor talon was a match for the steel axes of the Andals, who slaughtered the greenseers, the beasts, and the First Men alike, and raised beside the High Heart a hill of corpses half again as high, or so the singers would have us believe. Now, right after this passage about High Heart, we get this very important piece. True history suggests otherwise, insisting that the children had abandoned the Riverlands long before the Andals crossed the narrow sea. But, however it happened, the grove was destroyed. True history completely absolves the Andals of destroying High Heart. It makes the excuse that the children were long gone from the Riverlands before the Andals even arrived. Remember, this is the same true history that, despite all the evidence to the contrary, maintains that the long night was 8,000 years ago. This is the same true history that could have been written by Andals and Septons. This is the same true history that George doesn't want us to trust. It might be true, however. Maybe the children did abandon the Riverlands long before the Andals came. But that would mean some epic battles like the Night of the Whitewood didn't happen, where supposedly the children of the forest emerged from beneath a hollow hill to send hundreds of wolves against an Andal camp, tearing hundreds of men apart beneath the light of a crescent moon. Furthermore, if the children abandoned the Riverlands long before the Andals came, why did the Andals try to destroy the Isle of Faces in the Riverlands? This passage right here even speculates that the children took shelter there on the Isle of Faces. Even so, why would the children abandon the Riverlands long before the Andals arrived if the Isle of Faces was still around? If High Heart was destroyed before the Andals came, as true history suggests, the Isle of Faces would be the next best place for the children to take shelter. And the Isle of Faces is still in the Riverlands. Anyhow, there are no arguments provided as to why true history affirms the children abandoned the Riverlands long before the Andals came. It provides nothing to back its claims, which goes back to my hypothesis that true history was simply written to protect the Andals, and it does. It says the Andals did not destroy High Heart. Furthermore, if it tells us that the Andals did not destroy High Heart, it's basically telling us that the First Men destroyed High Heart. True history is putting the blame on the First Men. However, none of us can ever know for certain how it really happened or who really destroyed Highheart. All we can do is draw some logical conclusions based on what we think we know. So let me present to you two logical scenarios with what we do know, and then you can decide for yourself whether it was the first men who destroyed Highheart or the Andals. However, I first want you to know that whoever it was that destroyed Highheart may have committed the greatest atrocity in history against the children of the forest. If we compare Highheart to the hill of the Three-Eyed Crow where the children still reside, Highheart was basically a metropolis in comparison. Remember, Highheart once had 31 massive weirwoods crowning the hill. We also know that the children lived beneath hills, just as they do where Bran is currently at, beneath the weirwoods. If they lived beneath the hills, it only makes sense that they lived just the same way at Highheart. However, the hill of Highheart is larger, much larger, and it is quite possibly the highest point in all of the Riverlands. Remember, no enemy could approach unseen. The hill is so high that in one of Arya's chapters, she says that it stood above the rain. With all this in mind, since the hill is so very big, it only makes sense that so many children of the forest may have once resided there beneath it. It could have been their capital city in a sense, especially with all the weirwoods and roots beneath it. So, now that you know what Highheart could have been, I will now present to you two logical scenarios and let you decide what makes more sense, that the Andals destroyed Highheart or that the First Men did. If the Andals destroyed Highheart, this would tie in with the whole theory of the Andals triggering the others and the Long Night. The destruction of the sacred hill of Highheart would be a perfect catalyst for the children to unleash the others. Furthermore, you can't forget that the books say the pact endured up until the Andals came, and that the Andals drove the children out of all the deep woods the pact had once given them. All this would tie together the whole theory of the Long Night happening in the Andal invasion. The Andals destroyed Highheart, one of the children's most sacred dwellings. They caused the breaking of the pact and forced the others to be unleashed, which then explains why the others hated iron, because the Andals killed the children and the weirwoods with iron. Now, what if the First Men destroyed Highheart, just as true history suggests? Well, if the First Men destroyed Highheart, that would mean it was destroyed thousands and thousands of years ago, before the pact was forged. It would have to have been destroyed in the ancient wars between the First Men and the children, because after the pact, there was only peace between them. If this is the way it happened, then we still have no reason as to why the children may have unleashed the others upon the First Men in the Long Night. The pact wasn't broken until the Andals came, remember? Why would the others be unleashed in an era of peace between the children and the First Men? So, if the Long Night happened when the Andals came, it actually paints a clearer picture. This is why I believe that the Long Night happened during the Andal invasion, and that the Andals destroyed Highheart. So, I don't trust true history. I don't trust them when they say the Long Night happened 8,000 years ago, and I don't trust them when they say the Andals didn't destroy Highheart. I believe true history was an attempt at a cover-up, and that it worked. which is why people are none the wiser that the Long Night happened in the Andal invasion. However, there's something else in history that may have been an attempt at a cover-up, particularly something in the Age of Heroes. Like Sam said, everything we know about the Age of Heroes comes from the Septons. In particular, I want to delve into the legend of Duran Godsgrief and the construction of Storm's End. This legend was written by Septons. The biggest evidence for this is that Storm's End is said to be the 7th castle built, an obvious number and legend devised by the Septons. However, if Storm's End was an Andal legend written by Septons, then Duran Godsgrief might have also been an Andal legend written by Septons. And I bring this up because there's something else that Duran Godsgrief did that just doesn't make sense in the supposed history of the Age of Heroes. The Godsgrief himself was first to claim the Rainwood, that wet wilderness that had hitherto belonged only to the children of the forest. His son, Duran the Devout, returned to the children most of what his father had seized. But a century later, Duran Bronzax took it back again, this time for good and all. Duran Godsgrief supposedly took the Rainwood away from the children of the forest, after they had supposedly helped him build Storm's End. This just doesn't make any sense at all. But for the sake of argument, let's assume the children didn't help Duran build Storm's End. Well, he still took the forest away from the children, which still doesn't make any sense. Because if he took the forest away from the children, that would mean he broke the pact, which is something the first men never did, according to the books. The Andals were actually the ones who drove the children from the deep woods of the pact, not the first men. Even so, the Age of Heroes is supposed to be marked by peace between the children and the first men. So this legend makes even less sense. This implies there wasn't peace between them. Again, this just seems like more history blaming the first men for transgressions against the children. And again, history was written by the Andals, by the Septons. Of course, it says that the son of Godsgrief, Duran the Devout, returned the forest back to the children. However, his father would have still broken the pact. If Duran the Devout simply returned the forest, then was there just no consequences for the breaking of the pact? Maybe Duran Godsgrief caused the Long Night by breaking the pact, you could be thinking. Well, if that's the case, then why did his grandson take the forest again? Duran Bronzax took the Rainwood back again a century later, this time for good and all. If Duran Godsgrief caused the Long Night, you have to remember that the children and men worked together in that Long Night. So why would Duran Bronzax break this peace again after the Long Night by taking the Rainwood, especially in the Age of Heroes, which is supposed to be marked by peace between the children and the first men? Again, none of this makes sense whatsoever. The likeliest explanation to these nonsensical tales is that they were all just poorly devised by the Septons and the Andals to deflect blame from themselves and pin it on the first men, just as they did with Highheart. Actually, here's another part of history that contradicts the legend of the Rainwood. After the Andals conquered the Stormlands, they intermarried with the first men, and the children of the forest, all but forgotten, vanished entirely from the Rainwood. Wait a minute, I thought Duran Bronzax took the Rainwood from the children for good. How did the children vanish from the Rainwood if it was already taken thousands of years earlier by Duran Bronzax? Again, none of this makes sense, especially since that would make it twice that the first men broke the pact. The first time would be with Duran Godsgrief, the second time with Duran Bronzax. This would contradict all the tales of the Age of Heroes that said there was peace between the children and the first men. All of this simply supports the notion that the Age of Heroes was written by the Andals and the Septons to hide and cover up from history their transgressions against the children that caused them to unleash the others and bring about the Long Night. The Andals eradicated the children, drove them from the deep woods the Pact had once given them. They destroyed Highheart, burnt out the Weirwood Groves, hacked down the Faces, and everywhere proclaimed the triumph of the Seven over the old gods. So the children fled north, forced to unleash the others, inadvertently bringing about the cataclysmic Long Night, which nearly ended mankind and all of life. And it was all because the Andals. But the Andals didn't want history to remember. They didn't want to go down in history as the men who nearly brought about their extinction. This is why they wrote True History. This is why True History says the Long Night occurred 8,000 years ago. And this was achieved solely because everything we know about the Long Night comes from accounts set down by Septons.